Yard, Chapter 11. The little clearing Will had Crescent Heelan's clearing was growing considerably more crowded. Malcolm's small cottage was already stretched by having to accommodate Lord Ormond and Xander. As a consequence, Will and Horace chose to pitch their own one-man tents on one side of the clearing, close together where they could talk in private. The Scanadians had brought canvas and ropes from their ship, and they set about building a large communal shelter for themselves on the far side. At least, Will thought, there was no lack of timber available in Grimsdale Wood. A large fire pit was constructed in the middle of the clearing for heating and cooking purposes, and to provide an area for relaxation as well. On the first evening, Horace looked a little askance at the roaring blaze that the Scanadians built. The Northerners seemed to have a love for setting big fires, whether they were burning down villages or just sitting around having a drink. "It's a big fire," he said doubtfully to Will. "It could be visible for miles." The ranger shrugged. "No harm in it," he replied. "It'll just add to the legend of Grimsdale. Strange lights, strange sounds." At that moment, the Scanadians, who had brought a few kegs of the rough grain spirit that they had flavoured with caraway seeds, broke out into a sea shanty. "Strange sounds indeed," Malcolm put in. "If I could have come up with something like that, I would have kept people away from my home for another 10 years. One of the Scanian broke away from the circle around the fire and lurched towards a small group of onlookers. He thrust a beaker full of the spirit into Horace's hands. "Here you go, General," he said. "Take a drink." Horace slipped carefully. He made an immense effort to control his expressions, but there was nothing he could do about the way his hair wanted to stand on end. When he could breathe again, he handed the beaker back to the men. "Not bad," he said, a little breathlessly. The Scanadian bellowed with laughter and slapped his new commander on the back. The sea wolf's grasp of military courtesy was rudimentary, Will thought. "That's the spirit," the Scanadian said, and staggered back to join his friends. "My God," said Horace, the taste of the liquor still burning his mouth. "I could take rust off my armor with that stuff." Xander had come out of the veranda of the cottage as the singing had started. He glared disdainfully at the Scanadians and walked over to join the little group. "Is this going to continue for very long?" he asked, to no one in particular. Malcolm, Horace, and Will regarded him with distaste. Then, deciding that he had asked no one in particular, they each decided to let the person answer. Xander's scowl deepened as he realized they were ignoring him. "Malcolm," said, "how is my lord supposed to sleep through this infernal racket?" Malcolm regarded him thoughtfully. "In my experience," he said, "if one is tired enough, one can sleep through a little noise." "A little noise," the secretary sputtered. "Do you call what those barbarians are doing?" He got no further. Will's hand suddenly clamped over his mouth, and the rest of his question was reduced to an unintelligible mumbling. Eventually he stopped, peering fearfully above the hand into the ranger's eyes. Will's eyes, usually so warm and cheerful, were suddenly cold and threatening. It was as if a curtain had been pulled aside to reveal a previously unseen side of the ranger's character. "Xander," Will said, when he was sure he had the man's full attention, Since we have been here, you have done nothing but moan and complain. Malcolm has saved your lord's life. He has given you shelter and food and a safe place to stay. These Scanadians, the barbarians to whom you refer, are friends of mine. They are going to help you regain your castle. Some of them will probably die doing it. Sure, we're paying them, but the fact remains, we need them. Now, we are all sick and tired of you, Xander. You had better realize that. Unlike the Scanadians, we do not need you. So if I hear one more word of complaint, one more snide remark, I swear I will drag you back to Macindow and hand you over to Kieran. Is that clear?" Xander's eyes still bulged above Will's hand. The ranger shook him roughly. "Is that clear?" he said very slowly and distinctly. Then he took the hand away. Xander breathed in, deeply and raggedly, his chest heaving. After a pause, he replied in a small voice, "Yes." Will took a deep breath in turn and exhaled slowly. "Good," he said, and Horace and Malcolm both nodded agreement. Will started to turn away from Xander, but the little man could not resist trying to have the last word. "All the same," he began in that pompous tone they knew so well. Will threw his hand to the heavens in a gesture of despair, then swung back on the little man. "Right," he said angrily. His hand shot out and grabbed a handful of Xander's collar, twisting it so that the secretary was thrown off balance and turned slightly side on. Then Will started towards the forest trail that led to the mere and, eventually out of Grimsdale Wood to the plain beside Macindow. I'll be back in an hour or so, he called over his shoulders to Horace and Malcolm. I've got some garbage to take out. Neither of them moved to stop him. Xander squirmed and wailed, but Will's grip was like iron. He held the secretary off balance and continued to walk quickly away, keeping him that way. Xander could do nothing but totter precariously along in his wake. He sensed that if he stumbled and fell, Will would not stop, but would simply drag him until he regained his feet. Horace wondered later if Will would have made good of his threat. He thought that perhaps he might have, except that Xander would have been able to provide Karen with a lot of useful information, including the whereabouts of Malcolm's clearing and the fact that Will now had a force of armed and eager Canadians at his disposal and was planning to attack the castle with them. Most likely, Horace thought, his friend would have thrown Xander into the mere. Whether he would have fished him out again was a moot point. But it was one they would have to wonder about, because just as Bill reached the beginnings of the track through the woods, one of Malcolm's people dashed into the clearing, coming from the other direction. It was Paul Derrick, a young man whose spine had been badly twisted in a childhood accident. He was permanently stooped to one side and could not look straight ahead, as his head was set crookedly on his shoulders. Yet Horace had noted how quickly the young man could move among the trees. Amazing how the boy could adapt, he thought. Peldarrick saw Will now and sidled up to him so he could look up at the young ranger. "Your friend," he said. "She's signaling." 2 hours later, Malcolm's small living room was crowded with people. Horace, Malcolm, Ormond, Gunda, and Xander were grouped against the fireplace. Will finished deciphering the last few words of Alice's message and sat back frowning. "Bad news?" Horace prompted. His friend shrugged. "Could be. Apparently Karen is expecting a visit from a General Macindow in the next few days." He glanced at the faces round the table. "Does their name mean anything to anyone?" Gunda shrugged, as did Malcolm. Ormond frowned thoughtfully, then shook his head. "Other than he's obviously a Scotty and the son of someone called Hadish. No. Have you heard the name, Xander?" The little man thought carefully and shook his head. After his recent confrontation with Will, he was grateful to be included in the discussion and wished he could provide more information. "I'm afraid not, my lord." "Well," said Horace, practical as ever, "at least it confirms your theory that Karen's in league with the Scotty." "True," Will said, "but I wish I knew a little more. For example, it'd be nice to know if this Macindow is bringing an army with him." Ormond rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I shouldn't think he'd be bringing a large party at this stage," he said, and they all turned to him. "The main route through the border will be almost impassable at this time of year. The snows won't melt for at least another 3 weeks. He reached for Will's pen and a spare sheet of the paper he'd been using and drew a quick sketch of the surrounding countryside. "The mountainside here form the natural border," he said. "As you can see, Castle Macindow lies right across the road from the main pass into Ireland, but the pass is closed during the winter by snow. That's why we've never needed a large winter garrison at Macindow. We've never had to contend with more than small raids." He quickly drew a series of thin slashes through the mountainside on his chart. "There are a lot of small side roads, but they're steep and tricky. You might get a small party through one of them, but not an army with its baggage train." Horace had leaned over his shoulders to study the chart. He nodded thoughtfully. "In addition," he said, "no general will move a large force into hostile territory without initial reconnaissance." Reconnaissance? Will nodded agreement. "So we can assume Macindow will have a small party with him, which means they'll probably travel by night." He glanced around and saw the others nodding, except Gunda, who was looking totally disinterested by now. Canadians hated planning, Will remembered. "So what do you have in mind?" Horace asked. "We keep watch on the castle so we know when he arrives," Will said. "Then, when he's heading back to Picta, we take him prisoner and ask him a few questions." Horace nodded agreement. "Not bad," he said, "but don't expect to get too much out of a Scotty. From what I've heard about them, you'll never get one to talk." Now it was Malcolm's turn to smile. "Oh, I think I might know a way," he said. Alright, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to read up to chapter 11. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 12, then please stay posted and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye bye.